I can't hear you. Good afternoon. That's better. Thank you so much. If I start running away, please somebody catch me. I'm scared being in front of all of you guys, but I'll try. Anyway, since morning we've been talking about IIPS as a concept, as a strategy, what adopters are looking for. We are going to change gears a bit with my session and talk about two things that I think you haven't looked at now. One is Mojaloop specifically, and two is the technology. So our session is taking a slightly technical turn. And what we want to achieve with this session is show different organizations at different stages of adoption. And our hope is that all the adopters, potential adopters, and people who are currently deploying will relate with one of these. We'll be able to relate with the questions we're asking, we'll be able to identify. So we don't promise answers because we might not necessarily have all the answers, but we are raising this so that people can say, oh, I can identify with that. And with that, then maybe at the breakouts, you are able to approach someone who can answer that question or who can sympathize with you because they're in the same stage. And then together you can go to Steve and find out who can answer that question. Okay. So I'll introduce my panel. First is Babuka Drame. He is the CTO of GamSwitch, the switch operator in the Gambia. Babuka, please come up. Next is Alain Kajangwe. Alain is the CEO of Wiredin, who has been working very closely with our switch in their deployment. And so he is able to tell us all that story. And then we do have Kelvin Joroge from IPSL, the switch operator in Kenya, who is the manager for site reliability and engineering. And he's going to tell us what he is doing here and what he knows about Mojaloop. Karibuni, guys. I think to start us off is Babuka, because your organization fits in the very first category where you are wondering about Mojaloop, you'd like to deploy, but you do have questions, you do have fears, you do have opportunities you want to seize, you do have challenges maybe you anticipate. Would you take us through what goes on in your mind when you consider Mojaloop?
Much too low for that question, and it's an honor to be part of this panel. Okay, so for us as GamSwitch, like the previous panel mentioned, Mr. So, we've been in existence for almost 10 years now, and we've had experiences, we've had success stories, but we've also encountered some pitfalls. And so for us right now, considering Mojaloop, it's a question of how do we get it right? What have we done wrong in the past that we can fix now? And a lot of times, cost is one of the contributing factors that we are always discussing. If you look at the Gambia, our population is just over 2 million. And doing transactions currently, I would say, if you look at the fee structure in our country, it's about 5 cents for fixed fees. We do also have percentage fees, but that's still considered expensive for a wide range of the population. And so what we're really looking at right now is how do we bring that cost down? And that's one of the main reasons why we are eager to explore the opportunities with Mojaloop. In the past, we've operated switches that are proprietary. So that means we have to pay for running the switch. And these businesses have also been coming up with new models of how to increase their revenues. One of them is annual subscriptions or support fees. It gets to a point where now they're even charging you per core or having to charge you per CPU usage and so on. So it's becoming more and more expensive for us. On top of that, We are doing transactions in our local currencies. But when we have to pay for these services, we are paying them in foreign currencies, US dollars, pounds, and so on. So there is really a need for us to critically look at our situation and see how we can bring down the cost to our participants, which is also extended to the end users. And that's why we are also currently in Rwanda to better explore Mojaloop, listen to the success stories of other implementers that started before us, and then we can chart a way forward. Thank you very much.
You mentioned the technology being used. How do you make that decision when you say, let's talk about Mojaloop? What are the main considerations you have in mind? And also, how do you face the switch from a proprietary software to open source? And what are the considerations you have there? Do you have any reservations? Do you have any questions? Or do you just go all and say this is good to go?
Okay, so lucky for us, we just concluded a workshop in Banjul where you and the rest of the team were there to take us through Mojaloop. But we definitely had concerns, or at least some gray areas and unanswered questions, not just as the national switch, but even other participants that were invited to that program. And one of them were actually, where is Mojaloop being operated at? How long have they been in existence? But one of the most important questions that they always raise is, the word open source, it really scares some. So you have to find time to explain to them exactly what open source is. We did our own research, even though it is open source, but it's not just like one individual implementing something and he's the only or the sole maintainer of that. We know that Mojaloop has a community that supports it. But on top of that, we had a strategy besides Mojaloop of implementing or building our own systems just to bring down the cost of transactions. So Mojaloop came at a critical moment when we've already started those discussions, coming up with the designs. And now what we're really looking at is how does Mojaloop really fit with our design? And so far what we have seen is Mojaloop is a platform that can really just cut down on the implementation time for us. But we are not only looking at Mojaloop as a system. We are looking at it as a whole project. You're not just talking about installing a system and moving away from it. We're trying to build an ecosystem where even the maintainers of Mojaloop will be local. So we don't want to entirely depend on the global Mojaloop community. Yes, there may be opportunities where we can collaborate, but even without their participation, we want to be able to move ahead with the solution.
Thank you. Kelvin, I think on top of that, you have a very mature switch that's on proprietary software. On top of that, what considerations do you have if you were to make a decision to say we are going to deploy Mojaloop? What would be your biggest questions, concerns, areas of clarification? What help would you need? And yep.
So first of all, thank you for the opportunity, and honored and delighted to be part of this panel. So yes, what you've mentioned is true. We do happen to be running a proprietary switch. So when the decision came, when we started evaluating, do we want evaluating Mojaloop as a switch? Some of the considerations for us was, the first one was a technical consideration in terms of we needed to come up with a technical evaluation matrix, something that we can use to objectively be able to compare our proprietary switch, compare Mojaloop, see the pros and cons of which, and have a basis upon which then we can be able to make that which you can call an informed decision. The reason is because a move such as this is not trivial. You can't wake up and just do it. So you need to have a proper way of evaluating. And so I think the first thing for us was coming up with an objective way of being able to evaluate our current switch and the Mojaloop switch. So that was the first thing. And some of the things then you ask, what do you consider, is we consider where we are today and where we want to be. So in terms of where we want to be, one of the key things that we addressed we looked at is around the areas of scalability, because we want to have a switch that has the capability to handle a significant amount of traffic, but then we also do not want it to be at an increased cost. Because at the end of the day, you are not comfortable having a switch where you have an AMC, somebody tells you hit this number of transactions, we are going to charge you more. So it's kind of dissuades you from your endeavors in terms of your ambition. So scalability was one, cost is another. You look at the use cases you implemented today, the use cases you hope to implement in future, and the maturity of that. And then you compare in both platforms how that has been. And then you also look at operational efficiency and operational ease. I think like my colleague here has mentioned, it is important that not only you're able to run this switch, but be in a position to be able to run the switch even going forward. So I think that for us was also a key consideration. What kind of a support are we getting on our current switch? What kind of support would we want for our switch going forward? And of the two switches, our proprietary switch and Mojaloop, which one gives us more options? And then you look at cases like security, or obviously how is security enforced in both, and things like those. Yeah.
So in that journey, are you totally internal, or how do you evaluate it?
So actually, you heard me say that one of the first things that we needed to do was to come up with an objective way of evaluating. And the reason why we did this is because in the first part of the leg of the journey, it's going to be largely internal. It's us to evaluate. But then at later stages, we will want our evaluation we would want to have somebody else look at it so that they can give us an outside perspective from outside, different perspective. So currently it is internal, but the journey is we would want to have a external perspective, external people come look at it, and that's why we are trying to come up with a definitive comparison matrix.
Is there any of the outcome do you have an opinion yet?
So
even if limited.
Yeah. So I will be honest, there's some very, very interesting things about Mojaloop. First of all, when you look at where would you want to be in the future, I think Mojaloop system has been built with a very futuristic approach. I am an engineer by profession, so from an engineering perspective, I would say it has been built with a very futuristic approach in terms of scalability. It's very scalable. It is open source, and being open source is a big thing because sometimes vendors can really they can be such vendor lock-in such that you are unable to innovate from a technical perspective. So, and it has concepts like infrastructure as code, which is something I find amazing, configuration management. So from a futuristic perspective, definitely there is a lot to love about Mojaloop. Now, that being said, everything has its pros and cons. I would not want to, sit here and say the only good things about Mojaloop, because then somebody looking to adopt Mojaloop, if they find something not exactly working out as they expect, then they will say, it was perfect for them, it's not perfect for us, so we'll not pick it. So every market has different nuances. And I think that is where has been the biggest challenges that we found with some elements of Mojaloop. There are things that are intrinsically Kenyan, intrinsically enshrined in the way we operate, and they may not have been considered in Mojaloop. So that becomes now a key consideration. These things that are intrinsically important to us, can we be able to implement them in Mojaloop, or do we make a decision of not going with them at all? So, but then not going with them at all is not really an option. So then we ask ourselves, can we bring them to Mojaloop? What is the cost in terms of the effort, the time, for us to be able to achieve it? So those are some of the things that we've encountered in our journey.
Thanks, Kelvin. One interesting thing is that When we talk with Kelvin, he tells me, you're a Kenyan, you know. He puts me on the spot because I can identify with his questions and his situations. I hope anybody else who calls us, whether you're from the Gambia, from Sierra Leone, we will know. Just tell me you're a Sierra Leonean. I'll accept and I will know, okay? Alain, you've looked at where Babuka is. I mean, just in the formative stages. And also Kevin with a very mature switch, trying to understand Mojaloop. Do you share with this how was the implementation journey as you've peeled the onion more and more of Mojaloop and understood it? How would you answer these gentlemen? How would you relate with their concerns and their, yep.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. So I'll probably be in between and mostly closer to Kevin, where Kevin is or was, right? When it comes to the implementation and the adoption of the Mojaloop switch. And it's funny that I'm sitting here, but I'm more of an integrator, but not running the switch. So maybe Emab or somebody else should have been sitting where I am sitting today. But since we work very closely with our switch, I think I can say a few words about that. So the first thing is deciding to leave or to switch from a system that was already in place, where you were already doing a number of production grade transactions. This is the case with our switch. When it comes to their P2P use cases, it's already running for the past 3 years now, right, on another switch that they've been very comfortable with thus far. But looking at the Mojaloop switch, there's a number of things that was and is very attractive. So this is probably what I'm going to talk about in trying to answer the concerns that Kevin and IPSL have, and Boubacar at Gamswitch. So when you look at, so first of all, yes, the fact that the Mojaloop switch is an open source platform kind of like puts people on edge a little bit, right? But it's not necessarily because you have had one bad experience or another with an open source platform does not really make it so for all the open source solutions out there, right? For the simple fact that, so basically when you look at open source, first and foremost, you are looking at communities of practice, right? Where people like-minded who have a lot of passion about the same subject come together and build something together. So in natural sense, one would probably feel a little bit more comfortable with such a solution where you have hundreds, in some cases, thousands of people bringing their expertise, experience, and know-how to actually build something, right, that they're very passionate about, where money is probably not a big factor to begin with, right? As opposed to looking at a closed loop solution. So that's one thing. The second thing, now more specifically, when you are thinking about adopting a solution like Mojaloop, at least when we started looking at it, I was involved with our switch since 2020, maybe even since 2018, 2019, working on the first phase of the RNDPS solution. And when they started talking about the possibility to adopt the Mojaloop switch, I was part of some of the early conversation then, and I started to get an interest. So as I was looking really under the hood as an engineer, I could see that it has a lot of merit, right? Compared to the other systems that we were implementing. or had been implementing in the past. I could see that with this solution, basically, not only are you able to do a lot more to innovate around it, right? So it does a lot very well, right? As a core switch, right? All the best practices of a switch, I believe, right, are built into this platform, right? So I'm not saying that it is a plug and play platform. I'll probably not sit here and say that, right? But the core of what you're looking for in a switch is really there, right? And then on top of the fact that it's open source, it gives you the capability and the freedom to actually innovate around it, right? Build all type of things around it. And actually now to Kevin's concern, maybe allow you to feel like you can unplug from this old system and plug into the new system quite easily, right? Just because of the way it's designed as a modular platform, right? Microservice-based architecture, you can pretty much build connectors that you are already using on your old system on the Mojaloop system switch, and still be able to transact as if nothing really changed, right? At least this was the strategic step or decision that was taken at Archridge in order to ease the potential switch from the P2P platform now to this Mojaloop switch, right? So a decision was made that we do not want our current participant to have to implement a new API, right? Because we are switching to a new platform. So because of the modularity of the design, the way the switch itself is designed, you can actually do that, right? It's a microservice, so you can basically build connectors around and still without touching the core of the system, right? In other platform, you probably would have to go in and actually touch at the core, and sometimes when you touch at the core, funny things can happen. So, and then to my brother from Gambia, I think if you are looking for something, and what I liked about what you said was, if you want something that you can build on, not only to solve your current problem that you have right now, but for the future, then this is definitely it, right? Because you have everything, and then you can innovate and build and grow it from what it is today.
Thank you for that. Maybe one more follow-up question on that. Kelvin talked about uniquely local situations, maybe regulatory, maybe technical, maybe societal. I know, for example, there's a way Kenyans do transfers that Rwandans don't, right? How have you seen those opportunities or challenges, and how have you built solutions around them? What is the approach? Have you got those situations where there was something that's purely, that's Mojaloop, but this is Rwanda. We need to make it fit here. How do you approach that?
So specifically, so in the level 1 principles, you have to allow the person that is about to be paid to basically be shown what the transaction is going to be, right? And the participants basically to also add any fees or commissions, right? So this is what in the Mojaloop world they call this the quoting service, right? So it's not only in Kenya but also in Rwanda. The quoting phase, right, is an innovation, and it's not something that would probably work right now, right? It's a very good concept, of course, right? But if we were to build and deploy the switch with that three-step transaction phase, including the quoting service, obviously would not work, right? It would be, yes, it would work if on the other side, the participants are willing to make the change to their own systems and then educate the customer to also expect, to confirm the transaction on the receiving end, right? Rather than on the sender, then it would work. But as you can imagine, this was going to be a big conversation to have, right? And in some cases, a tough conversation to have, right? So what we ended up doing, so we saw that this was not going to work out very well. So with the help, and this is also something that is good when you're talking about an open source solution, and the fact that the Mojaloop community is very active, right? So we basically talked with some of the members in the community to understand how we could basically try and bypass this quoting service. And also because of the design decisions that were made previously. So you're able to do this, but because this is just a component that you can ignore is probably a harsh word, but you can mute it, if I can say that, right? And then be able to use it at a certain time, or with different participant that would find this quoting service as a necessity for them. So yeah, so I think the design decisions that were made around it allows us to do a lot with the switch, right? Not necessarily build it and deploy it the way it has been conceptualized in some parts, but to look at it and use the core that will probably not change much, right? Because the way you book a transaction, right, and the way you settle a transaction at some point, those are generally accepted norms across, right? So, but it's the user experience now that differ, and then those you can pretty much manage on the peripheries.
Thank you. One of the most common questions we get as we talk to potential adopters, and I know some of you relate with this, is who do I blame? Yes, when I'm at IPSL, I know who to call. How do you relate with that, Babuka and Kelvin, in terms of we are going open source? What does that question mean to you? Either of you can go.
You've said, who do I blame?
Yes, it's a question we get. Somebody who wants to know, from a technical perspective, you are responsible for business continuity, for reliability. How much does that weigh on you?
Actually, it weighs a significant amount. For us, one of the key considerations for us when it comes, are we going to implement Mojaloop? Are we going to have sufficient technical know-how that tomorrow, if I have a problem, I have no one to blame? I have the inbuilt internal in-house capability to analyze this particular problem, solve it. I actually not only have the capability to analyze the problem and solve it, but I have the knowledge that allows me to gain insights on the system that allows me to, preempt it before it happens. So for us, then, a key part of the adoption becomes knowledge transfer. And, there's the knowledge transfer that can be done for accelerated adoption. No, that is not what I am talking about. I'm talking about the kind of knowledge transfer where our engineers have the capability to look at the different components, the different modules of Mojaloop, and have an innate and very good understanding. Look at the various open source technologies that have been employed. Say that, for instance, this is the API gateway we are using, and we have the capability of saying that, you know what, in-house, we have a lot of knowledge on this API gateway, or this API gateway that is being used we know there is a lot of external support or open source support, excuse me, not only from a Mojaloop perspective, but from the solutions that are being used. So for us, that is actually one of the biggest considerations when it comes to us considering, are we going to adopt this platform? What will it take for us to have that knowledge? Because really, you cannot blame anyone. And like I said, I'm an engineer. I'm a site reliability engineer by profession. That means that my career is built off a scenario where things went wrong. And when things go wrong, Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. When things go wrong, you get punched in the face. And everybody is looking at you to provide the solution. And you cannot blame anyone because they paid you because things were going to go wrong. So for us, I think that is key, building that in-house capability. Of course, we are very happy there is a vibrant community. We hope the community still grows. We also want to be able to contribute to that community. But key for us is being an expert powerhouse internally.
Can Babuka go, then you take them together? Okay, go ahead, Ala.
So just to touch on, so one thing maybe is not be too scared or daunted by the technologies that are out there. Yes, there is a learning curve, but you would quickly realize that it's not that complex once you are actually in it, right? When you have no other option, you're already at the deep end of the pool, so you need to swim, right? But if you wait until you know all the techniques, right, then it feels like you'll never get there. But once you're there and you have no other option, you quickly realize that, this is definitely feasible. But yes, I agree. We were in your shoes, and believe me, the first few months were painful, but today I can definitely tell you that we probably do not call ourselves experts, but I feel like we have a good handle on the platform. Yeah.
So I'm glad that our thoughts are aligned here, and especially what Kelvin said. So I believe the question about who do I blame will always come up. But what's important is, can we fix it? So he mentioned about vendor lock-in. Usually when you get a proprietary system, they will also tell you that it's scalable. And from a technical perspective, you mostly look at it that way. Can the system be scaled? But we've realized that vendor lock-in is also detrimental to scalability, because you don't always have the answers to questions when they are asked. But what happens when you get the answers to those questions? If you go to your vendor, most likely there is an invoice coming up with it. But if it's something that you have control of and you can really fix it, then I think the question is, how can we fix it? And then after that, maybe we can see who to blame, but at least we've solved the problem. So for us, it's a matter of having that control, being independent enough to be able to tackle the obstacles as they come and find solutions to them and move forward.
Thank you. Maybe to finish before we take any questions, Allah, in as much as you've learned to swim, how have you received help? Has it been totally internal, or have you depended on the community, on the ecosystem? And how has that helped you? What is the significance of everybody in this room in making your switch a success, if any?
Definitely the community has been, tremendous in our success, right? So I can name a couple of names, James Bush, Sam have been very instrumental to get us to where we are today, right? And we really appreciate, and there's a number of other people in the room, Michael Richards, that basically are always, the folks from Tita Works were also very gracious to give us our our first tour, actual technical tour of the switch as a team. So the community is definitely there to help you succeed, right? And then the other thing also is, and this can actually be a knock sometimes on the Mojaloop, but there is a lot of technical documentation out there, right? So there is probably a bit too much of it, but it's, other systems you'll say there's not enough documentation, but in this situation, there is a lot of documentation. Every component is very well documented, right? So that alone and the help of the community basically helps the deployment, because this was actually one of our unplanned success, was how quickly we were able to deploy the Mojaloop switch on premise, right? The documentation was there. It hadn't been done on premise elsewhere, but there had been a work stream on this, and things were documented, and the community helped with that. And within, I think, 3 weeks, maybe a month, we had deployed the switch as is on premise on the and this was a quick win that we had planned to actually have in about 3 months, but in about maybe 3 weeks to a month, we had already done this, and it helped basically move everything faster.
Thank you. The adopters, we started with, we hope you'll identify with one of these organizations. I hope you do. And I hope you can share with their stories, their concerns, their challenges, the solutions they have offered. But we'll take any question there is to any one of these gentlemen or to the panel in general. Any questions? Bwana Richards.
Thanks, Tula. I hope you won't mind if I take a little time to say that Alain, I'm afraid, has broken my poor old heart. And he's done that by mistaking, I think, how the quotation phase, which I prefer to call the agreement of terms, works in Mojaloop, and indeed beyond that, what it's for. It's not the case that the quoting phase is designed to tell the receiver of funds, the beneficiary, how much they will be getting or how much will be paid. Though that information is provided so it can be given to the debtor party, as is the case, for instance, in most mobile money systems at the moment, where you're asked to confirm that you wish to actually execute the payment before you do. No, what it's there for is to make sure that both parties agree the terms of the payment before the payment is executed. And it's like that in order to reduce the operational costs of the system by reducing the number of failed payments to as close to zero as we can possibly manage. Now, that relies, of course, on participants being able to make a truthful response to the question, will you execute this payment if I send it to you? Now, it's not always the case that participants are in a position immediately to do that. And that's a problem Switch needs, or a scheme needs eventually to solve. But the reason we have that agreement of terms, as I say, is essentially about reducing the operational cost of the system by making sure, first of all, that there aren't payment failures, or if there are, they happen before anybody is asked to commit funds. And second of all, that people don't have to spend long amounts of time reconciling and solving disputes that have arisen as a consequence of payments being executed or part executed, which later become the subject of disputes. That's what it's there for. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily a quick or easy thing to implement, but our judgment is that it's a very important thing to implement, and it is for those reasons. So I will now crawl off into a corner and lick my wounds.
Intention, Michael.
Okay. Any other question?
No, I just want to comfort Michael Richards that it works great, the quoting tool. But I just wanted to say in our markets, the prices are set. Price to consumer is set, price to the service provider is set. In fact, what we are seeing now is even interchange between the various participants has been set by the regulator. So it's great, Richard. It's just that it's not something that either side of the transaction can negotiate. The regulator has said this is it and published them on portals and websites and in bulletins, etc. But we appreciate the way it works. Thank you.
I appreciate your appreciation, but I want to say, is yours a market in which there is tiered KYC? No, you don't have mobile money systems with tiered KYC? Oh, okay. Well, most markets do have mobile money systems with tiered KYC. And the point about tiered KYC is that it's really only the creditor institution who knows whether or not a payment can be received at the time it is requested, because it will depend on the balance in the customer's account. It may depend on the number of transactions that customer has executed over the course of a day. It may very well depend on the amount of the payment. Most of that information is only available to the creditor institution at the time the payment is made. And that's one of the strongest reasons why we have this agreement of terms, because it's one of the fundamental principles of the Level 1 project and of financial inclusion generally, that where people don't have a lot of KYC to add, they shouldn't be prevented from joining the system, but they should only be allowed to join it, let's say, in a reduced capacity, either because their balance is set at a limit or because they can't do that many transactions, those kinds of things. They can promote themselves by providing more KYC, by making themselves more trustworthy to the system. But this means that we can include from the beginning people who don't have very much KYC, the poor, the people who find it very difficult to get a place in the existing financial system. They're the people we want to reach, and they are therefore the people that we need to be able to confirm can receive a payment when that payment is offered.
At the risk of not exploring that to conclusion, I want to protect the rest of the audience lest they forget the lessons learned from this gentleman. Maybe, Simeon, we need a small lunchtime session just to talk about quoting. As I explained to, I think, Paul Makin once, that it's the biggest question we get, those flow and how the agreement of terms works. But let's not get into that deeply technical, because I think I don't want you to forget what Babuka and Allah and Kelvin have shared in terms of the adoption journey. And also Steve is looking at me not so nicely because I'm out of time. He's refusing, but he is.
Maybe just a minute before we wrap it up. I think that's what I meant when I said that there are certain nuances that are different in each market, separate from the envisaged design of Mojaloop. To Mojaloop is a level 1 project. Our existing ecosystem is not level 1. So there tends to be a deviation that you kind of have to solve, if I may put it like that. It's not, so yeah. So those are the kind of the nuances I was saying. Doesn't make it impossible for you to adopt Mojaloop, just that somehow you have to tweak it or find a way to fit it in your existing environment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kelvin.